The Shroud of Turin, a holy relic or a clever hoax? For centuries, this linen cloth has fascinated millions of Christians who believe it bears the image of Jesus Christ. However, scientists have been unable to prove or disprove its authenticity, using various methods to date and analyze it. Now, a new discovery claims to have solved the mystery, using a novel technique that dates the shroud to the time of Jesus. But is this claim trustworthy, or is it another false hope? Well, you just have to stick around to find out. The Shroud of Turin is a linen cloth that bears a faint image of the front and back of a man who appears to have suffered from crucifixion. Many Christians believe it is the actual burial cloth of Jesus Christ and has been revered as a holy relic for centuries. However, various scientific and historical investigations have disputed its origin and authenticity. The Shroud of Turin remains one of the most mysterious and fascinating relics in history, as it challenges our understanding of science, religion, and human nature. It is also a source of inspiration for many Christians, artists, and writers who have tried to capture its beauty and mystery in their works. Scientists and nuclear engineers wanted to conduct a fresh test on the shroud because they were not satisfied with the results of the radiocarbon dating test in 1988, which dated the shroud to the Middle Ages, between 1260 and 1390 CE. This result contradicted the other scientific and historical evidence that suggested the shroud was much older and could be authentic. Some critics of the 1988 test argued that the samples tested were contaminated or taken from a repair patch that was not part of the original shroud. However, the Vatican believed this was unnecessary, as previous tests revealed the shroud's authenticity. Furthermore, conducting fresh tests would mean bisecting parts of the shroud into smaller pieces, further depleting the material's originality. Because of this, some proposed alternative methods of dating the shroud, such as thermoluminescence, infrared spectroscopy, or nuclear analysis. Some also hope to find new clues about the origin and nature of the image on the shroud, which remains a mystery. However, the most recent discovery by researchers about the Shroud of Turin has marveled scientists out of their wits, proving that this was not expected at all. The discovery shows that the shroud dates back to roughly 2,000 years ago, based on a new scientific procedure called thermoluminescence dating. This technique measures the amount of light emitted by minerals when heated, and it was applied to various samples from different parts of the shroud. The researchers claimed that this indicated that the shroud was not a medieval forgery, but an ancient artifact that could be authentic. However, other experts criticized and doubted their claim and questioned the validity and reliability of their method and data. The earliest historical records of the shroud date back to the 13th century, when it was exhibited in Lille, France. It was later acquired by the House of Savoy in 1453 and moved to Turin in 1578. Since then, it has been kept in the Chapel of the Holy Shroud at the Turin Cathedral, where it is occasionally displayed to the public. The shroud's image was first discovered in 1898 by Secondo Pia, an Italian amateur photographer who photographed the cloth negatively. He noticed that the image was more precise on the dark side than the light side, suggesting it was not painted or dyed onto the fabric. He also found traces of bloodstains on both sides of the shroud, which he attributed to wounds inflicted by nails or hooks. In 1978, a team of researchers led by Richard Taylor obtained permission from the Vatican to examine the shroud directly for 5 days. They used various techniques such as photography, microscopy, chemical analysis, and radiocarbon dating to study its physical and chemical properties. They concluded that the shroud was not a medieval forgery, but an ancient artifact that had undergone damage and alteration over time. They estimated it dates back to between 1260 and 1390 CE. Based on radiocarbon dating results from 3 different laboratories. However, their findings were challenged by other researchers who questioned their methods and interpretations. Some critics argued that radiocarbon dating was unreliable or inaccurate due to contamination or sampling errors. Others suggested that the image on the shroud could have been produced by natural processes such as radiation or heat exposure. Some also proposed alternative explanations for how Jesus' body could have been imprinted on a linen cloth without leaving traces of his DNA or blood cells. Other arguments have been made against the shroud's authenticity, based on scientific studies that cast doubt on its origin and age. One of the most controversial findings was the radiocarbon dating by 3 different laboratories in 1988, which established that the shroud's linen material was produced between 1260 and 1390 CE to a 95% confidence level. This contradicted the traditional view that the shroud dated back to the 1st century CE when Jesus lived. However, some critics have challenged this result, arguing that the samples tested might have been contaminated or taken from a repair to the original fabric. In more recent years, new discoveries have emerged that seem to support or contradict some aspects of scientific research on the shroud. For example, in 2013, scientists from Italy used infrared light and spectroscopy to date the shroud between 280 BCE and 220 CE based on its chemical composition and spectral signature. They claimed that this period covered Christ's lifetime and excluded any possibility of being a medieval forgery. However, other experts criticized their results and pointed out methodological flaws or inconsistencies in their data analysis. In 2015, scientists from France announced that they had found traces of pollen grains from plants native to Palestine on both sides of the shroud's image area. They argued that this indicated that Jesus' body had been exposed to natural elements before being wrapped in linen cloths during his burial or resurrection. The authenticity of the Shroud of Turin remains a complex and controversial topic that has been debated for centuries by historians, scientists, and religious scholars. One of the main arguments in favor of the shroud's authenticity is that it contains real blood, both pre- and post-mortem, which has been identified as human blood by various methods, such as chemical analysis, DNA testing, and microscopic examination. Some researchers have also found traces of pollen grains from plants native to Palestine on both sides of the shroud's image area, which could indicate that Jesus' body was exposed to natural elements before being wrapped in linen cloth during his burial or resurrection. Another argument in favor of the shroud's authenticity is that it shows signs of being consistent with Jewish burial practices and Roman crucifixion methods at the time of Jesus' death. The image on the shroud matches the wounds and bloodstains caused by nails or hooks piercing through the flesh and bones of a man who was crucified upside down. The image also resembles a man who had suffered from severe physical trauma, such as fractures, bruises, burns, and lacerations. Some researchers have suggested that these injuries could only have been inflicted by a violent struggle or a fall from a high place. The Vatican has always maintained a neutral position on the shroud's authenticity, leaving it to the personal judgment of the faithful. The Church encourages the veneration of the shroud to remember the passion and resurrection of Jesus, regardless of its origin. Some church leaders and scholars have expressed their opinions, supporting or challenging the new test. For example, Cardinal Gualtiero Bassetti, the president of the Italian Bishops' Conference, said that he hoped the new test would shed light on this extraordinary sign that speaks to us of Christ's love and his sacrifice for us. On the other hand, Father Andrew Dalton, a professor of theology at the Angelicum University in Rome, said that he was skeptical of the new test and preferred to rely on the previous radiocarbon dating that dated the shroud to the Middle Ages. Some of the evidence obtained from the shroud from previous tests include, first, the pollen grains on the shroud, which indicate that it originated in the Near East and traveled through places such as Jerusalem, Edessa, and Constantinople before reaching Europe. The pollen grains also indicate that the shroud was exposed to plants that were native to Palestine and that were used for burial purposes in 1920. Second, the coins on the eyes of the image on the shroud, which indicate that the man on the shroud was buried according to the Jewish custom of placing coins on the eyes of the deceased. The coins also indicate that the shroud dates back to the 1st century CE, as they have been identified as lepta, small copper coins minted by Pontius Pilate in Judea in 29 CE. Third, the image on the shroud, which indicates that the man on the shroud was a bearded, long-haired adult male of about 5 feet 7 inches in height and 175 pounds in weight. The image also indicates that the man on the shroud had 7 unique facial features that match the descriptions and depictions of Jesus in ancient sources. The image also indicates that no known artistic or natural process produced the image, but a burst of intense radiation that emanated from the man's body on the shroud. As you can see, there is no clear consensus among scientists or historians on whether or not the shroud is authentic. Some believe it is a miraculous sign of God's presence, while others regard it as a fascinating historical artifact. Regardless of what you think, the Shroud of Turin has captivated Christians all over the world today because it is considered by many to be a tangible sign of the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The shroud bears the image of a crucified man who has wounds and bloodstains that correspond to the biblical accounts of Jesus' suffering and execution. Many Christians believe that the shroud is the actual burial cloth of Jesus, and that his image was miraculously imprinted on it when he rose from the dead. The shroud is also a source of inspiration and devotion for many who see the face of their Savior in it. Let me know your thoughts about the Shroud of Turin in the comments. Thank you for watching till the end.